live, and today I'm joined by Joseph as my co-host, and we have a very special guest, Malcolm Harris. We're going to be talking about a lot of interesting stuff, including his new book, What's Left, which is an exploration of potential paths out of the hell world that we currently inhabit, this world that we must leave. It's going to be looking at three different options that are being explored by those who still have a vision of progress for the way out of the future. So, Malcolm, you're not looking at those who have a kind of racialist or nationalist bent, or those who still believe in kind of techno-optimist market fundamentalist positions, but you're still kind of looking towards those who have a pro-social and progressive vision of the future. And you've kind of categorized these visions in three separate categories of market crafters, public power, and communism, right?
Yeah, well, first, thanks guys so much for having me on, and thanks everybody.
Definitely, thanks for coming on.
He's going to join us, or has joined us, or will join us. Yeah, that's my book, the setup of the book. I really wanted to be careful when I was splitting it up, both to be as even-handed as I could be structurally and intellectually, which was an interesting project for me. But I also tried to pick labels that wouldn't trigger people, so that I'm not like, this is the liberal solution, and if you're like not a liberal, then these are the bad guys. You know, I wanted people to think through the strategy on their own terms, which is why I use market craft and public power versus I could have used, say, liberalism and socialism. My plan broke down a little bit in the third section, which we can talk about. But communism is communism, and there's no way around that, thankfully and unfortunately.
Right. So I think what's interesting about your work here and in your book here is you are kind of trying to bridge the gap between the reformist and the revolutionary left. And I think,
for all the thanks I get for it, guys.
Well, I mean, I kind of try to do the same thing in a way. Like, I try to stay friendly with people on both sides of the bridge, I guess. You know, I also, I get shit for it as well. But I try to keep dialogue between both camps. I appreciate that that's something you're trying to do here. And
it wasn't originally part of my plan. I was just going to do the communism and then leave it at that. And I convinced myself that that wasn't like realistic enough to win my audience's trust. Basically, like they wouldn't go for it. And the reason they wouldn't go for it is that it's not realistic. It doesn't reflect the kind of time horizon that we have. And I'm not going to convince everyone who's working under progressive strategies in the world to join my specific strategy in the relevant time frame. And so we're going to have to find ways, if not to unify, I'm not like for a popular front or some false unity here, but we got to find ways for these strategies to relate to one another, if not to unify, right? How do we like click together? And when I started looking at and thinking about moments in modernity of significant progressive historical change, there's always a left field that goes from liberals who want the bourgeois horizon of liberal right, all the way to communists who want to abolish all class society. And that's, if you look at any moment, right? If you look at the Chinese Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the American Civil Rights struggle, the Civil War, if you go back to the French Revolution, you see this same sort of left spectrum. And that's who I wanted to talk about. And that's what I wanted to think about and apply that sort of that thinking and that spectrum and that field to the climate crisis and think about how it relates to that.
Right. So I guess I actually like that you do believe that the left exists, that there is a meaningful concept of the left that encompasses the entire category of people that sat on the left hand of the assembly of the French Revolution.
Yeah, I think we got to make it real, right? I mean, it's not something that exists whether we do it or not. It's something that we have to do, but it's something that people have found themselves doing a lot at least in the last couple hundred years, right? I don't think these are eternal categories, except maybe communism. But they represent the historical period that we're in, right? They structure that period, and we need to study the relations between them and think about how we can apply them in our lives pretty directly, I think.
Right. So I think, the market, I'll have to be honest, I wasn't able to finish the entire book. I got through the market crafting chapter, and I got through the public power chapter. And so
you didn't get to the good stuff, man.
Yeah, I didn't get to the part that I actually hope for, the part that I actually believe in, which is communism. Because despite the fact that I am, a DSA member and obviously, an organization with a bunch of reformists, I do believe in the communist horizon. But I think the market crafting stuff was interesting to me because it did have a lot of overviews of policy that was experimented with during the Joe Biden administration. But my understanding was, this was written before the whole abundance discourse, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so
significantly before. I mean, it came out at the same time as the book. Their book and my book came out roughly around the same time. So,
okay, so, but the whole YIMBY discourse was already happening when you were.
Yeah, sure. I make one reference to YIMBYs and one reference to NIMBYs, I think, in the book.
You do reference the NIMBYs and the YIMBYs, but I guess that wasn't the main thing you were thinking about when you wrote this, but
I'm even conciliatory. I'm even conciliatory to the YIMBYs to a certain degree, because I think at its best, that's a market craft strategy in a good sense. And market craft, maybe this audience is going to hear market craft and they think that's a bad thing or whatever. But market craft, as the term is designed by Stephen Vogel, who's a political scientist. I think he's at Berkeley still. The way he looks at markets is as a tool of human societies that we can use to affect things that we want. And we have a whole range of ways to structure those markets intentionally to get the outcomes that we want. And that's very different from a market fundamentalist perspective, in which markets are like the truth of human nature or the truth of history, or like something we have to sacrifice to in order to get things that we want. This market craft says markets are just a tool. They're one of a set of tools that societies of people use to achieve the things that they want. He compares it to like statecraft. So that market craft is sort of like the domestic equivalent of statecraft. It's as important as statecraft, and it's about the government creating the conditions in which private companies can operate in the public interest. And so like Brandeisian anti-monopoly stuff, I think, falls totally under this category, or not totally under this category, but substantially under this category, because it's about how do you structure markets to yield the kind of competitive environment that's going to get people the things that they want without producing an excess of capitalist class power. When I put that to Zephyr Teachout, she was good enough to stand for the position at the conversation we did in New York, but I don't think she embraced the market craft label. But I think it's a good one, and I don't mean it derogatorily. And anyone who reads this book will understand that I really I give it its best shot. I give it everything that I can see through that strategy, trying to understand the well-meaning partisans of market craft strategy, how they see this working, how do they see it affecting the change that we need to see. And I think when you get to folks like Saul Omarova, or even someone like Lena Khan or Mike McCarthy, who I think is more rad, but writes in the sort of democratizing finance space, that's talking about the socialization of the investment function. That's not just a liberal solution. Once you get to the point of socializing the investment function, you're not talking about just tinkering with markets. You're talking about crafting them in the first place. You're talking about structuring them in the first place in the collective interests from below, or at least from a democratic institution. And I think that's worth thinking about, right? That's a strategy that is in play already. Obviously, the People's Republic of China is the most advanced market crafting society
I was gonna say, like,
Absolutely.
how does market crafting kind of relate to China?
Yeah, I mean, that is the strategy that they are excelling at. Obviously, there's some public power elements involved there as well, with directly state-owned and operated entities. But that's part of a market craft, even. Like, it's part of a larger market craft strategy that the Communist Party has pulled off way better than any other country has pulled off doing a climate market craft strategy, including and especially the United States, which has been extremely bad at it. And that doesn't just mean producing a ton of solar panels and a ton of electric vehicles, which China obviously has done, but also things like planting trees, which China is doing better than anyone has ever done in the history of the world, right? It's the largest afforestation, reforestation campaign in world history. And like, yeah, there are market players involved in that process, right? There are people who get paid to do that work, and people live in a market society in which they have to fulfill their needs on the market. No one's saying that they have, brought back the iron rice bowl or whatever. Like, this is a market strategy.
Oh, yeah.
And yet it's something we can look to for inspiration for those of us who want better things to happen in the world, right? It's a demonstration of how that kind of strategy can work, at least a limited demonstration of it.
It seems like a recognition that for as long as we have to exist as markets, we have to sort of leverage the investment functions of the capitalist class without ceding to them, like undue institutional power, essentially. Like, because right now capitalists essentially through the operation of the market essentially control all investment. They control where things get built and what gets valorized by society. So the idea here is that market craft is like a spectrum. It isn't necessarily left or right. It's a recognition, for example, on the left, that we need to be able to use the market to achieve policy ends that we'd like to see, at least for now.
Yeah, the metaphor I use in the book, and I'm very fond of metaphors in the book, but one I use in the book to talk about market craft is complaining about the outcomes in your market society is like holding an imaginary tea party and complaining about the quality of the cucumber sandwiches and blaming your stuffed animals, right? Like, market actors are playing in the structure that you created as a democratic society, at least in theory. If you're complaining about the outcomes, you need to restructure the market. You need to change those market conditions in the first place. They're just doing their jobs, like literally just doing their jobs. And if you want them to do a different job, then you need to create different conditions. And so something like banning Bitcoin mining, which China has done, incompletely, as these things tend to be, and we can talk about that. But as said, we don't want to use our social resources on Bitcoin mining. Like, that's not a good thing for market players to do, and so market players are not allowed to do that. You also can't produce cherry flavored rat poison lollipops for children. Like, that's a market craft choice. You're not allowed to do that because that would lead to bad outcomes. And so any sort of market action that we have is a product of market craft, at least under the philosophy of market craft. And we need to take responsibility for those outcomes. And if we don't like those outcomes, we need to figure out how we can change our crafting choices, our policy choices, to yield the kinds of outcomes that we want, up to and including the seizing of the investment function itself. To say, ultimately, capitalists, you can invest a little bit, you can have your small business, or you can buy our bonds, you can buy the state's bonds. But your job is not to direct the investment function of society. That's society's job, and we're going to drown you out. And we're going to create conditions under which you don't get to have that kind of choice that you have now. And that's what, to a certain degree, I think market players face in China. And that doesn't mean there are no billionaires in China. There are a large number of billionaires in China, in fact. But it does mean that they sort of have to follow what at least the party and what the state outlines for their function to be, or else that position can be yanked, right? They can lose that position really fast. It exists only by the grace of society. It is not something that they own outside of society or against society. And that's a market craft perspective on wealth, which I think is some of what abundance is about. Like some left abundance perspectives are about, and same with even left YIMBY perspectives are about this kind of market crafting. And then a lot of it is market fundamentalist, where they say we need to accelerate social technological development, and the only path on which that's going to accelerate is a market-based path. And so we need to just push the ball down the field. Like I said, I'm terrible with these metaphors. We need to keep going in that one direction, and that the one direction is already decided for us. We don't have a choice in terms of what we're actually going to invent, what an abundance of what. Our ability to control that is very limited, and so we have to like repair the highways instead of blowing up the highways, you know. And so that's where I find myself in conflict with the abundance folks. Is not obviously the idea of social abundance, which everyone on the left can get behind, and not even on the idea that like we need to build a bunch of stuff, because I do think we need to build a bunch of stuff. I'm not a like left-wing survivalist who thinks we're just gonna cobble stuff together in the charnel house of whatever is left of this shit. Which you know, and those people have some points, and those people will be like, yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how your like progressive plans for the future. They might be right, and I allow for that in the beginning. I'm like, don't be mad at me when I show up asking for lessons on how to hunt squirrels or whatever. Like you might be right.
You
like,
say maybe progress will fail, and maybe, you know,
maybe we lose, right? And in fact, if you're playing the odds right now, maybe those are the odds. Maybe that's over 50% or whatever. But that's not me. I don't play the odds. I'm not a gambler. I'm a communist, and I believe on the world for the world. And if I'm wrong, then we'll try to build the world for whatever is left of the world. But until that, I'm convinced of that. I still believe that we have paths open to us, and not just one path, but a series of paths.
Right. I think, you know, with the market crafting stuff, I feel like, you know, you're already like, you have the ability to kind of discipline markets to democratic authority, right? So I feel like when you already have that ability, if you're already going in that direction, why not go all the way? You know, if you're already, it seems like you're already kind of going in the direction of planning, and you're already starting to make capitalists listen to pro-social ends and follow pro-social ends. So I feel like if you are already going in that direction, it doesn't seem that you might as well just throw the capitalists out of the way, right? I mean,
well, part of the benefit of the market craft strategy is that you don't have to fight a war in theory.
Right. I get that is
right. Like that's a very important. If they're saying is like, and I think a lot of market crafters will say, look, like we would lose in a society in which you've got all the power and guns and money and wealth concentrated in this class by definition. Right. The capitalist class by definition controls capital, which by definition is what matters in this society, that we can't push a strategy in which we're going to fight a civil war and lose, and that's going to be unappealing to people. And you'll get to this when you get to the communism chapter, because I talk about that some of the drawbacks of communism is that as a strategy is that you're talking about, well, we don't have any money and we don't have any land and we don't have any power, like sort of by definition. And we want to start a war to the death with the people who do have all the money and the land and the power. And like, that's our strategy. And that leaves something to be desired for some people, in addition to the fact that we have to give up the world as it exists and we want to destroy the world as it exists. And even though a lot of people have a lot of problems with their life, the slogan like destroy your life is not particularly popular. People don't jump on the destroy your life bandwagon, because there are things in people's lives that they appreciate and that they depend on. And it means like, you know, the sort of revolutionary suicide of like everything in your life is destroyed and that's the only thing you can do. That's scary. That's a very scary thing to tell people. And we have to say it. That's part of being a communist. But one of the things that market craft has that is appealing, maybe not to us as communists, but to a lot of people out there, is that this is a strategy that doesn't involve a civil war in which you have to destroy your entire life. There's something to be said for that.
It is a hard sell.
It is, and we have to recognize that. And part of the benefit for me of structuring it the way I did, which is that each of these 3 strategies gets 5 sections about why they're the best, why they're the answer, and then 3 sections about, oh, well, here are some contradictions, here are some holes, here are some problems, is that then I had to think through those for communism from the perspective of people who weren't communists, and to say, like, well, doesn't that mean that what if you like accidentally kill some people? And you're like, oh yeah, like that really is a concern. Like, it's not that we don't understand that, and it's not that we don't take it seriously. It's that we sort of fade that to the background because we all understand it and we all take it seriously in theory. And so it doesn't have to be spoken for some of these things. And so for some of the drawback sections for communism, I'd bring those out into the open and say, look, we're not writing for a partisan audience, and I don't mind talking about this publicly and saying what I really think about these things. Because we have to, especially if we're going to gain any sort of credibility with people, we have to say, like, look, people have made these mistakes in the past. Here's how we're going to not make them again in the future. And we have to do that as communists. We can't just say this world is terrible and the only solution is to trust us to build a new one.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, definitely agree with you there. So I think, like, one of my problems with the market crafting solution is I just don't think it takes the crisis facing humanity seriously enough, you know? Like, I think just tinkering at the edges of, you know, the economic, you know, coordinates of these markets and hoping that we can kind of push capitalists to act in more pro-social ways down the road and hoping that they'll build more electric cars. You know, it's just, it's not taking the crisis facing humanity seriously enough, I think.
I think that's definitely true about the United States. Market craft in the United States, at least the dominant strains within the Democratic Party. I think that's true within Europe. I don't think it's necessarily true in China, right?
Well, yes, but I think with China, they're able to do the level of market crafting they're doing because they had a civil war.
They had that violent process
that has total authority over the capitalists. You know,
it's true, and so but what someone who is taking a sort of market craft position would say is that's something we can develop here, right? That's a within our power to build relatively quickly, you know. And when someone like Saul Omarova is talking about a national investment authority, it's not like there are tools by which even like Keynesian, post-Keynesian tools in which theoretically we can suppress this class. There are ways to do it. And it's not like none of them work. But it's true that none of these, part of the premise of the book is that none of these strategies are going to work by themselves. And that none of them operate by themselves in any scenario anyway. And so it's always going to be about the coordination and relation of these strategies to each other. Period. And so again, China's an example, and you have within the party, within the state, within the society, this whole spectrum, right? You have people who are straight up like Dengists who think that they figured stuff out, and that socialism with Chinese characteristics is this market-based society, and that they figured it out when no one else has in world history, and that they're going to build the things that humanity needs. And they've got a pretty good argument for that. And then there are people who argue that this is only possible because it's about the sovereignty of the Chinese people against the capitalist class and the world capitalist class. And they understand it's a tenuous position, and that they are still in a conflict with the world capitalist class, and that that's not finished and must continue. And then there are people who recognize that the Chinese state itself has certain limitations, and that the imposition of the state as it is was quashing certain other progressive directions that we still have to try and understand and try and figure out. And so it's not like there's no society in which you don't have, I think, this full relevant spectrum even.
Yeah, no, that is true. Yeah, the Chinese Communist Party itself has different views on what the path forward is. You have people who, I think, do actually really want to go full steam ahead towards communism and the Communist Party of China. And then you have, like you said, people who actually think they kind of have figured it out. But yeah, no. So
I have a question. I mean, I guess my question is, in the United States context, though, because China is very much an exceptional case. how are you? I mean, it seems to me like it resolves itself to a question of like the balance of class forces, because how are you going to use the state to induce the capitalists to do these things when they overwhelmingly control the state through their agents?
So we saw an attempt at something like that with the Biden administration, with a lot of government spending. And I think that was in large part a product of left-wing market craft thought infiltrating the higher ranks of the Democratic Party. And I don't, if you compare Obama's policy reaction to the financial crisis of 2008 and the wake of that, and the Biden administration's policy reactions to the coronavirus crisis, even if you compare the Biden administration's reaction to the coronavirus crisis to other nations, to other comparable countries, and their spending and their state response to the crisis, ours was much better. And that's not because Joe Biden is a smart man. He's not. It's not because Joe Biden's a good man. He's not.
Contrary to what Chris Hayes has.
No, yeah. Curiously, it's because like a bunch of rich people paid a bunch of money to support market craft ideas within society. And so you have to like press on these conflicts within the capitalist class and within the state if you want to try and use it to undermine itself. And do I think this is the solution? No. But is it a strategy that is relevant to us and that is going to continue happening? Like, absolutely. And when I see leftists thinking like, or who seem to think there is nothing that we might want to ask of a mayor, for example, like that there's nothing that they have that we might want, I think that's misguided. I think that misunderstands what we're trying to do. And as to your point, doesn't take the crisis seriously enough. That if this is what we think it is, then we do need friends within the state, or at least people we can sort of trust within the state, right? And we do need to play on contradictions within the capitalist class, right? We do need to press on conflicts between green capital and petrocapital and different parts of finance capital that find themselves in opposition, right? We need to press on all of those conflicts. And that's true whether we believe market craft is the solution or not. But since some of us are going to be doing other stuff and are not in a like really great place to press on those conflicts because we don't really have anything that they want necessarily, we need to be working with people who do. And we need people out there who do and who understand this position. And one metaphor I use in this section is I talk about Dawn soap and how when you're cleaning up after an oil spill and rescue workers are trying to save birds, they have to use Dawn soap, even though Dawn soap is itself produced with petrochemicals. And when you try to use other soap, it doesn't work as well. And when birds have oil all over themselves, they try to clean themselves and they get it into their digestive systems and they immediately die. And like, that's the kind of crisis and so market crafters would say like, you're not taking it seriously because we need to start building all of those things we need right now, right? We need to build way more energy infrastructure right now before we have a social revolution, because by that time, even if we have a social revolution, we won't have the solar panels that we need. We won't have the like physical infrastructure and objects that we need to avoid a catastrophic scenario that then we would be responsible for, right? And that's a fair point. Like, that is true. And the fact that it doesn't align with how we want to spend our time, and we don't think that like the most productive use of our time is starting a solar panel company, that doesn't mean that we don't need someone to actually be building solar panels. Like we do need people doing that.
We do need better productive forces.
And we can acknowledge that. We can say that publicly and say that those powers right now are largely in capitalist hands, and we're going to not need to find ways to get them into production, into reality, before we have control of them. I don't think we can wait till we have control over the productive forces to try and push the productive forces to produce the things that we need. We need a bicycle factory in the United States. Like we should push for that. And we should have, glass recycling at the municipal level so that we're actually reusing glass instead of sending it a million miles away to get heated up and reformed or whatever. There are any number of ways that we can think of that we could still build useful things even without a revolution, even without people's control over the productive forces. And we know that because we use the things that the capitalists have made already, right? We're talking via capitalist technology right now, and it's useful to us. We are making use of it, and we don't have to spend all our time saying thank you or whatever, or like we don't have to start small businesses, but it is worth being aware of that and saying that we're aware of that. And sometimes people get confused, you know, especially if you're coming into this stuff raw, or you're coming, you know, you've had a scales drop from your eyes moment and you want to be involved in left-wing politics. And when people don't talk about these concessions and these like more pluralistic thinking, more realistic pluralistic thinking, then some people get the idea that we're not about that we don't believe that we don't think that is true, and that we think that nothing useful is being made, or that like anything that a capitalist does is intrinsically XYZ, or, you know, and that's
it. Feel that way sometimes, I will say.
It is. It's easy to feel that way, but that's like, part of my the task with this book is to get people on the same page, and to get people on the same page means a lot of acknowledgement all around that. And we've spent a lot of time, because it's the first chapter in the book and it happened to be the one that you read, talking about marketcraft, but that's just one part of it, you know. And I think everyone's chapter is in the right place, in that it appeals to the psychological makeup of the partisans. I feel like the marketcraft people are like, yes, we're the first people mentioned. This is the first strategy. It's the strategy that's like at hand now. This is we should be first. And the public power socialists are like, we're right in the middle. We're the center of the left. We're the right idea in between the spectrum. People are going to be looking in the middle to us. We're in the middle. That's where we should be. And then the communists are like, we're last. We have the critique of the thing that happened. We you know, the final thought. That's where we should be. We should be at the end. And I think that allows us to think a little bit, right? And part of my hope was that I did enough sort of those kind of concessions, and that the structure of the book and the work of the book itself is enough of a concession that I could get people's good faith enough to have real conversations about this. And that's been semi-successful, not particularly successful. I don't like blame the abundance people exactly, but that's a distinct line, and a line that draws the relevant political spectrum somewhere else. And that is a threat to our project, I think.
Yeah, let's talk about the abundance people. So how do you kind of see them in relation to the left project, and how do you kind of see them as a threat or an ally? Like, is there any ways we can draw them as useful, or are they just, you know, a threat that needs to be crushed? Or
I think, like I said, there's a lot in the marketcraft section that can appeal to left abundance people, and even center abundance people. I think if people read it with an open mind, I think a lot of them would recognize their politics, or even a better version of their politics, right? I think, honestly, I make the argument better than they do for a progressive left.
I think you do, actually. Yeah,
I think so, and other people who've read the book think so, but partly because I put more work into it than they did. And I think the abundance spectrum that they want to talk about is like overlaps with the marketcraft part, maybe like half, and then goes out to the right. And so there is definitely some overlap, but their understanding and their spectrum, I think, is a market fundamentalist one. And the fact that it has some like market crafters on the left end doesn't stop the center of it from being a market fundamentalist project. And that's too bad. I don't think it has to be. And I think part of it is the mediocrity of it, that like I don't think they like disagree necessarily with some of the like Saul Omarova National Investment Authority kind of stuff, but they don't think about it. At least they don't think about it in the book, and I haven't seen any real engagement with that stuff from them. And I think that represents the intellectual level of the book. I think you have some like regular guys who are writing down to their audience, which is really unfortunate, when I think what we need is intellectuals writing straight to their audience.
I mean, I think part of it is also they seem to be very fixated on eliminating or drastically reducing market and industrial regulations. That seems to be their focus, which seems to suggest a certain class basis.
That is a big part of it, but it's not the whole thing. And if you read the book and you look at, a lot of it is about state capacity and improving state capacity. And a lot of that is like state capacity. By what they mean by state capacity, it sometimes means giving money to private actors, which can be kind of market craft or whatever. But it's true. It's, once again, it's the first chapter, right? Their first chapter is about removing blockages, but that's not what the whole book is. And if I'm a book critic, which I wrote a review of the book, it's my responsibility to take the whole object and really think it through on its own terms and try and understand it, and then maybe apply a critical lens. And again, I don't think it's a good book, and I don't think it's a strong book. I don't think it's a strong like intellectual project, but it's not as bad as some people think it is. It's like straight up neoliberal as some people think it is.
It's not straight neoliberalism, but it's not very clever. I think the way they focus so much on like Ralph Nader, and I think it's funny.
It's because one book. They read one book, and yeah, I'm sorry, but that's literally, they read one book that blamed Ralph Nader, and
yeah, like I thought it becomes
really a load-bearing thing in their argument.
Yeah, they kind of take aim at like these middle-class yuppie environmental activists of the 70s as like kind of like a big source of the problem. And I find this kind of ironic because like that's kind of the same class base of that gives us YIMBYs, if you think about it. Like,
well, their argument actually is that that's the class base of NIMBYs, that those are precisely NIMBYs, which I think is like, they don't use class as an analysis, and if they did, they would realize that YIMBYs and NIMBYs are the same people.
Yeah.
That they're like, we're talking about a family quarrel, like sometimes literally over like particular pieces of land, right?
Yeah.
That is not they don't necessarily represent like real political philosophies. And when I just saw the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP, it's a big institution here in Philadelphia, just got zoning approval for a 1,000 space parking garage near their campus. And I swear to God, the Abundance YIMBYs or whatever they're like that guy in the meme looking at the two buttons, because they hate this project, and they're right to hate this project. It's a terrible project. Like building a giant parking tower where they're building a giant parking tower is an awful idea, really awful idea. Now, if they want to fight it though, they have to use this kind of policy action that they supposedly hate. They have to be like, oh, this is bad for like children's health or whatever, and like, don't do this because we've got these like levers that we can build based on policy that was created in the 70s after the like crushing of the left, right? Like that's where the left scurried and like found some place to pursue left policy agendas that were acceptable enough to the capitalist class, like environmentalism, which they certainly were not wrong about. And interesting, to be fair to the book, it's not like the book is anti-environmentalist, I don't think. It's they're arguing that we've gone too far, that they were right then, but they're wrong now, and their power is sort of congealed, and they have this idea, I would say even ideology, about how collective action works, and they're looking at like Mancur Olson, and they think this is like the truth of humanity, is that like we have all these collective action problems because people form into these groups, and these groups ossify, and they seek their own narrow interests, and then it's hard to find collective consensus for stuff. And this is their like existential sense of how humanity works.
Yeah, like it's kind of I read a good chunk of it. I almost got a kind of anti-democratic sense of it, to where they're kind of frustrated that civil society is too active, and the activity of civil society is like putting up blockages to like build the big infrastructure that they want to build.
It is, but they don't want to understand why that's where civil society found itself. Like, what happened to civil society in the 60s and 70s such that it was put into these bullshit nonprofits and NGOs? Like, was that always the agenda? Like, no, it wasn't. There was revolutionary environmentalism and like labor environmentalism and all of these different movements that I talk about a little bit more in my book, because I care about this stuff, and I think they should care about it too. And it's poor leadership from our intellectual class. This is what happens when you have podcasters writing books instead of.
Well, the fact that they like did their book tour with like Richard Hanania and like all these like ghoulish, like horrible figures, you know, it did not help.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of money there. I don't know, like there's real money there, and I don't not mean the New York Times and the Atlantic. You know, that those are real companies, and these companies have a sense of, I don't know, I guess Derek's not at the Atlantic anymore, to be fair to Derek. Substack is one of these companies too, I guess.
Yeah.
That have an interest in promoting their figureheads, that have like their employees as talking heads. And I know the Times in particular is more and more interested in their columnists doing that kind of work. And I think Ezra may be an example of that. Which is, from my perspective, really too bad. Like, I grew up reading Bob Herbert's column in the Times, and like Bob Herbert's column in the Times was really good. He's a liberal, he wasn't a communist in 1999 or whatever, but he cared about things that mattered, and he wrote columns about it twice a week. And I read those as a teenager and learned a lot about the world, one thing, but also about writing and about like how to make an argument and compose an argument. And I don't think young people in particular, are getting the same thing out of these podcast interviews and out of
no, there is something to be said about the decline of our public intelligentsia, and
it's serious. I think it's real. And that, like, the people who are responsible for that should think seriously about it. I haven't been able to convince anyone to take any sort of sense of personal responsibility about this stuff, but I do, and that's why I write books, is because I think books are important, and I think the medium matters, and I think people get something special from approaching arguments in a book as opposed to just like, here's what I think every day in my Substack post, or here's my like thoughts of the day.
Yeah.
You won't remember with the one that I wrote 2 weeks ago about how like Donald Trump is a degrowther or whatever.
Here's the MAGA Maoism.
Right. Totally irrelevant. Not true. But
yeah,
it doesn't matter, you know?
I'm biased in this because I run a publication, but like there is like a lost art of like publications being a collective thing rather than like every writer having their own Substack and
Absolutely. Well, and being able to go to a publication and develop your like sense, as opposed as your sense of taste, your sense of thought, exactly. Which is different than, I like this guy, I follow this guy, I have a parasocial relationship with this streamer or this podcast host or whatever, and I like the things that they say. That's a different thing than I read this magazine because I like the people who write in this magazine, and
right.
The editorial sensibility appeals to me, and I can like, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes I don't like this stuff, and I don't like this guy who writes for it, but because he's off on this end, and that it's a different thing, and it's the like ultra processed food of intellectuals, right? We're eating the Wonder Bread intellectually now, and when the bread's too soft, you don't chew enough, and you don't get the like facial muscles, and so we all intellectually look like these like bloated sort of like faces with no definition, like
just getting bloated off intellectual slop.
It feels that way, and you watch the like degradation of standards, and it's really sad. It makes me sad, it bums me out, and I think there's a real like political threat that represents.
AI is just going to make it worse and worse too.
It is. It's doing it actively. Well, and that's why we need to be really active about drawing a cultural line and saying like, don't do this. People who do this are outside of whatever, are bad. It's bad to do this. Too bad to use this tech in this way. But also that it's good to do the other things, like good to read magazines. It's good to read books. It's good to like think with people.
It's good to think.
Thinking is very important. You cannot outsource that to the lowest common denominator machine. Like, do not do that. Please don't do that. Don't even start doing it. Don't even think about it.
Thinkers will be outlaws. So got a question here. What do people think about Abundance DC coming up soon with Klein and Thompson speaking in terms of sponsors and co-hosts like the FAI. I'm not sure what the FAI they're referencing here is. Does anyone know?
Yeah, the Future American something. They're fucking defense fascists.
Oh, okay.
They're like abundance means build an abundance of killer drones to kill Chinese people. Which again, like that is part of the abundance spectrum. Is people who are like abundance means build the best killer drones to kill millions of Chinese people.
Right. That's, I mean, Matt Iglesias and people like that are, you know, it's definitely, yeah. I mean, that's what I'm thinking is like.
And there's a lot of money there. I mean, I wrote the whole Palo Alto book about that lineage and where that was going. That book actually ends with Anduril is sort of the conclusion of that book. And when people were trying to talk to me about cryptocurrency and stuff and Sam Bankman-Fried, I was like, no, look at Anduril, look at Larry Ellison, look at defense tech, because that's where this is going.
Yeah.
And specifically prime defense contracts. The fact that these tech companies want to work directly with the government because they feel so strong and powerful that they don't think the government is going to mess around with them, which is how Silicon Valley has felt about the federal government for 80 years plus. There was a determination made during the Roosevelt administration that like, we don't want to do this job because it's too restrictive, because we're too accountable to the state. And the fact that they now think that's no longer the case and like, we don't mind being prime contractors and there's not too much accountability for us to take these contracts, extremely alarming, very, very alarming stuff.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely part of the abundance as a like political whatever. But I think that it's not very well constructed. It doesn't work. The whole thing isn't going to work because again, it's supposed to be a policy briefing for the Democratic Party and for like rich NIMBY liberals, but it mostly has attracted like these like fascist scumbag, or a lot of what it's attracted is fascist scumbags who want to kill millions and millions of Chinese people. And like, that's what they dream about, is killing millions of Chinese people, which is not for the first time. Like the missile designers in California have been dreaming about killing millions of Chinese people for many, many, many decades.
Yeah.
I write about that in the book. Like I don't even know if I included, there's this account of this missile designer in LA dropping a bunch of acid and being like, oh man, I had the best acid trip. I just like visualized all these bombing routes over China. Like that's what I did when I like tripped on acid. And like
that kind of sums up like the 1960s, doesn't it?
But still now, those are the exact same people.
That sums it up today.
That is like, what's his name? Parker at Anduril. That's exactly what they're like. Yeah,
I know who you're talking about.
Is it Lucky Palmer? Is that
yeah, Lucky Palmer. That's
Lucky Palmer. Yeah, Palmer.
Lucky Palmer. Palmer Lucky. Palmer
Whatever.
Lucky.
Yeah.
He's lucky either way.
You got that right. Fucking no one's wearing those stupid Oculus goggles. And he cashed out of that at the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, then you got Elon and Peter Thiel doing ketamine and visualizing their eugenic
well, there's a lot of outsourcing capacity to these private sketchy firms like XAI and what's the other one? Palantir?
Yeah, Palantir. So much of Palantir's growth has been, and I write about Palantir in the book as well, and so much of its growth has been post-Trump, because like what Palantir has been in the past is such a like scammy Silicon Valley product. It's like a really fun user interface that soldiers really like playing on because it's like Facebook. It's like, it feels like playing on Facebook, but it didn't actually like produce a lot of useful intelligence. The accounts of it was not that this was like a must-have tool. And so this pivot to AI and the huge growth of Palantir is extremely disturbing and mostly based on hype. And we'll see what they actually, we're in the unenviable position of hoping they just steal all this money, because it would be way better if they just like stole all this money and spent it on ketamine than if they like actually fulfilled the contracts and build the things that they're being asked to build. So with Silicon Valley, there's a better chance of that they'll that they'll fuck up and steal the money or whatever. But Larry Ellison has been waiting for the chance to build a national ID database for decades. Like, these are not new plans that these people are coming up with.
Yeah, no, I think there is a genuine desire for global race war against China and the third world in general to restore American hegemony. And I've been ranting about this for like the past 2 years or so, that war of China is coming. And I really do think that I don't know, I think that they're actually going to crack down on this and actually invest in the tech and create a fascist state to basically discipline the proletariat to do what they need to do to get this done. So
I think that's definitely one of the things that could happen. And I don't think Ezra Klein wants that to happen. I don't think Ezra Klein is like,
no, me neither.
World war with China, right? I think, like, in fact, we could convince someone like Ezra Klein that what he really wants is market craft and social control of the investment function, and a world where, like, we don't have to labor, rather than a like torched hellscape of post World War III or whatever. I think, like, we could convince these people of that, but and that seems obvious, right? It seems very frustrating that we've fallen behind in this way to these fascists, but fascists won the election. It's not surprising that we have a like, right wing, that the right feels strong and is acting strong. I just wish, part of me wishes that the left liberals, or just the regular liberals, would grow a little bit more of a backbone and become be more principled, right?
Of the kind of actual conflict that it would take to beat these people, so they fall back on the path of least resistance. And
I guess I think they really hope that things will work out the way they want things to work out, and they think that this is the best, most realistic way to get that. But I think they're wrong, and they should understand that they're wrong, and not stand next to warmongers. And that was one of the people like gave me shit about that in my review. I was like, if you can't say that abundance doesn't mean abundance of bombs, then you need to like think it over more. And they can't say that. They find themselves unable to say abundance does not mean abundance of bombs. And Joe Biden found himself in the same place, right? Like, where was that money going for the infrastructure investment, right? Chips to put in bombs. And they need to say that, like, we are not afraid of people who live in China. We do not want to kill them. That would be a huge leap for these people. And I think the people that they're speaking to, the masses of liberals, feel that way. And so they're being very poorly served by their intellectuals, by their chattering class on this issue in particular, I think. On the question of, like, should you allow multifamily housing to be built in your neighborhood or whatever, I think they're probably closer to right.
Right. Yeah.
But that is going to I don't think that's going to end up being the most important question in the way that they think it might be. I think like global war is going to be a bigger one, and they're totally flubbing that.
It's like, it's like, well, I just want to build like, multifamily housing, and, like, why can't we talk about it? But it's like, there's a genocide happening in Gaza.
Right.
There's about to be a war of China. Like, yeah, fine, let's build more housing. I'm not against that. I don't want to stop you from building housing, but let's have some perspective here. Like, there are other problems in the world, and I'm not going to like forget about these things just so like we can build more housing,
Well, and like in Iran is the most advanced mid-rise multifamily housing construction country in the world. And we probably shouldn't start a war with them. We should be asking, how do you build those buildings? And that's what the abundance people should be saying. And they don't, part of it is they are not thoughtful enough. And part of it is they don't have the integrity. But I think a lot of it is just like the social worlds that they live in doesn't think about how to stop war all the time.
Oh, it's very American-centric, Europe-centric, Western-centric.
And the world, if you're on the left, you spend a lot of time thinking about how to stop wars and how to stop American-led wars. And if you find yourself like shying away from the left at all times and keeping your distance from the left at all times, you're gonna miss out on a lot of that thinking. And that's a failure. And they should feel like failures. They are failing their listeners, failing their readers, and they should know that.
But how much of that is an intellectual blind spot, and as opposed to the fact that they have to cobble together a sort of unstable coalition. I mean, abundance includes people from like left progressives, but also people like Mark Andreessen, like who express like you know
But
the
Mark
VC
Andreessen's
crowd.
a YIMBY or a NIMBY. He like he lives in Atherton, which has a multifamily index of 0, and he's like personally fought the creation of multifamily building. And so like, what do they mean by including Mark Andreessen in their coalition or whatever, and not including us, let's say, or people to their left? Like, that's insane. And that's just market fundamentalist, right? That's saying like people who capitalists control capital, and therefore we have to be nice to them because they control capital and we need capital. Or in like what they say matters and what they think matters because they control our social resources. I don't know. Maybe they think it would be really sad if they thought Mark Andreessen was like thoughtful as a person in addition to his money. But I think like, they want to have dinner with billionaires, I guess. I don't know. I think that a lot of it goes to stuff like that, and people splashing money around and maintaining your position within society. I don't know. But I think it's less that people get shaped into being that person than the people who appeal to that space are the ones who get picked to fill it. And so someone like Ezra or Derek or whatever, I think they are in their jobs because of who they are. I don't think they've shaped themselves to their jobs so much. And so then I think you can hit them for doing a bad job. You can say like, you hold yourself to a higher standard, at least theoretically. I don't know. Maybe that's me being old fashioned and having different kinds of pride than other people do right now. When I see people posting like, oh, I asked DeepSeek or I asked ChatGPT and this is what they said, and like writing that in an article and sharing it with people, like I would nibble off my fucking pinky finger before I did that. Like I just can't imagine ever doing that and saying like, oh yeah, and then like listen to me and then like care about what I think.
Yeah.
Read my writing, like pay to buy my book. Like Jesus Christ. It was bad enough when people were
thinking. Why would you admit to that? It was
bad enough when people thank
have some shame.
10 research assistants in their acknowledgments or whatever for a 300-page book. And I'm like, well, how many pages did they write each? Or how many pages did you write? Shit. So yeah, the state of the industry is very bad. It's unfortunate, but it's something that people can improve by self-discipline and collective self-discipline, and saying that like, it is easier to listen to the podcast than to read the book, but I'm not going to do that because I don't want to do the easier thing. Like I'm not here to do the easiest thing possible. And if I were, I certainly wouldn't be a leftist, right? Wouldn't be a communist. So,
I legitimately just find it easier to read books than to listen to podcasts. Like,
of course, I can't do it. It's so slow. And the thing is that people listen to this 2.5-hour podcast to get an 800-word article. And I was like, I can read that 800-word article in 5 minutes. Like, what am I going to do with the other 2 hours? I guess I got to read a fucking book.
So I think I'd like to talk about the public power section now, because I think this kind of is kind of presented as the kind of solution to the problem of market crafting. And so how would you explain public power as a strategy, and how would you differentiate it from market crafting, and then how would I then relate to communism and differentiate from communism, I guess?
Sure. So public power as relates to market craft, as we just said, market craft is creating the conditions for private actors to provide you a society with the things that you want and need. Public power says, and if you don't do that, we're just going to do it ourselves, which is that we can build the things we need, we can maintain the things that we need, we can operate the things that we need using public auspices. And public power is, it's a pun. I'm talking about the power of the public, specifically the organized working class, specifically, or particularly, maybe not specifically, but particularly through trade unionism. But then also public power is in publicly owned and operated power stations, and power agencies, whether that's the Bonneville Power Administration in Pacific Northwest, or people are more familiar with the TVA under the New Deal. But to say we can build the dams, we can build the connection wires, we can operate the power system as a utility in the public interest, on the public behalf, in a green direction. We're not doomed to private actors. And some people would call that socialism. Some people call it democratic socialism, but I'm not. I had to keep pulling out the word democratic because I kept adding it in places where it didn't belong.
Right.
Where I was like, oh, and this is like, and it has to be about like democratic public authority. And I was like, well, no, it doesn't have to be democratic public authority. It's about public authority. And so I think maybe some Leninists felt not included in the book, but I think that they can be just as much under the public power category as any democratic socialist.
All right. I guess it would be like state capitalism would kind of fall under the term. I guess, state monopoly capitalism, as Lenin would call it, would be like what public power would fall under, like state control of assets, basically.
Yeah, and some people then would be kind of confused about why this is not communism, right?
Right.
Why well, if the workers control the means of production, then why isn't that communism? But that, as we know, that's not what communism is. And so communism, I talk about in a few different ways. I don't give a precise definition of communism, except for the arrangement of society from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs, which is for me the most important part of the communist strategy. And that's a different strategy from public power. And it involves the destruction of value as the principle of social arrangement, which public power doesn't necessarily involve, right? Public power, you can still have like money and markets and things that you do to distribute resources within society. Whereas communism says no to money,
right.
To money in particular, right? But and to value and private property and private control of, I guess public power gets rid of private control of power too. But it goes a step further to abolish this connection between value and life.
Right. So I guess, there's a lot to unpack here, because you've got public power, which is like, the state taking over the economy and managing it, right? And then so you're arguing that this is like the next step after market crafting, right? That you're taking over the stuff directly. You're not just kind of trading, do different rules for market actors to do things differently, but you're actually going to do stuff like the Tennessee Valley Authority, or like the Soviet Union, for example. Would that kind of fall under? Yeah. So did you do any kind of engagement with the history of actually existing socialism, or was that kind of outside your purview when you were working on this?
I did some. I didn't become a Bolshevik historian or whatever.
Okay.
In the ways that maybe some of your listeners are. So if they're looking for some of that stuff, maybe they'd be disappointed.
Yeah. We did a whole series of podcasts on the history of the Soviet Union and all that stuff, and got way too lost in the weeds of that. So
yeah, and I didn't want to focus on the Soviet Union in this chapter, both because I don't think that it's much of a forward road, and I think it would rhetorically undermine my position
right
with my audience in a way that was unnecessary. And I think I stick my neck out a fair amount to defend the project of the Chinese Communist Party, which I think is real and in the world and worth understanding from a sympathetic perspective. But I think there's less at stake in this kind of project when we're talking about the Soviet experiment.
Right. So I guess when looking at the weaknesses of the public power perspective, you didn't look so much at the failures and weaknesses of the Soviet project, but look more at, I guess, modern examples. Would that be fair?
No, I mean I do talk about like Soviet whaling a little bit. I think in there a little bit. I talk about there's a book about there's a pretty measured book that Pluto Press put out about really existing socialism and environmentalism that I think is.
I think we interviewed the author. Is it Salvador Engel de Maro?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know the title of? I'm been terrible with. I read too many books to remember the fucking title.
It's like at the tip of my tongue. I know the book you're talking about though.
But so I talk about that stuff a little bit. So it's not like I didn't engage with that history at all, because I think it's important both to think about this structure of this strategy and its limitations, but no, it's not as much a historical account as a present account of what I think is still a live strategy. I'm not trying to dig up the history of workers' control. I'm thinking about the actuality of workers' control.
No, I think socialists here, well, at least DSA here in New York City, and has was able to pursue a sort of strategy of public power, at least with a piece of legislation here called Build Public Renewables Act.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was to like establish a state authority that would essentially act like as a monopoly for power generation and transmission and whatever else. They met, to their credit, the DSA here mobilized and they managed to get it passed, but they sort of brushed up against the limitations of that strategy when the legislation passed, but the authority to actually establish the monopoly was, given to the state, where, we don't have any control in the state or any sympathetic or, so I guess that's one thing that I would say is that you're still going to be brushing up against the limitations of that strategy in the way that in the United States, political power is devolved in many different spheres, but also the balance of class forces in the final analysis, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about the BPRA in this chapter for sure. I think it's an example of a limited victory of what that could look like, and sets the stage for the development of public power. Because really what the BPRA is about meeting the state's climate goals. And it says if the private actors aren't acting to meet these climate goals that we have established, that we're going to act as the state to meet them. And that it becomes incumbent on us as the state to fill in and take that role, which I think is good. That's saying that's exactly the sort of, at least in theory, this movement between market craft and public power, where you say we've created this market craft structure, but more important than the market craft structure is the outcome. And so if we don't get this outcome out of the market craft structure, then we've got a public power structure that's going to step in and produce the outcome that we need, because we've agreed on the outcome. The outcome is decided, and it's in society's interest. And so then it's about how do we get to this outcome of green energy production, of decarbonization of the energy system.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what would you say are the weaknesses of the public power strategy then, or the main ones?
So a big one that I talk about is it's arranged nationally. Public powers, the proletariat is arranged nationally. And so you have a couple problems with that. One is international competition. So public power doesn't mean U.S. Cars Inc. fighting with China's Cars Inc. to produce electric vehicles, right? Like that's not the public power solution, which is about workers of the world uniting to solve our problems. And yet, in actuality, it becomes that very quickly. And it becomes that very quickly not by some outside intrusion into workers, but by workers pursuing their own interests. And so another thing I talk about in this chapter, in this section, citing Joshua Clover, rest in peace, is this idea of the affirmation trap, where organized workers, face two sets of interests. They face their historical class interests to eliminate the capitalist class and take over the instruments of production and their collective interests and the interests of society as a whole. But then they have their interests as workers who exist in a certain place, have wage demands, and in our particular historical period, or the historical period of the last 50 years, their central interest might be continued access to work. And we hear that a lot. And so that means in the New York context, for example, the building trades unions have lobbied against a law that was on Kathy Hochul's desk that would stop the building of new gas-powered cryptocurrency mines. And like, that's the worst kind of public planning you could ever do, is create, we need to create we need to use fossil fuels to produce imaginary money that is capitalist class power.
Yeah.
Like just pure capitalist class power.
The cause of labor is the cause of the world.
Right. Like the gas goes in, what comes out is fossil fuel emissions and capitalist class power. Like the factory you would least want to build.
Yeah.
And you have organized official labor movement, you know, trade unions coming out and saying, no, don't sign that bill because we want the jobs that come with building those installations. And that's not a false interest. It's not like they're confused. Like they might not have, there are particular people in particular places, and particular groups of people in particular places, particular unionized groups of people in particular places. And they might not be able to find a job that they are suited for in that particular place that pays as well as this particular job. And that's a real interest in terms of producing their lives. And so historically, this produces a real problem for a left that's trying to assume public power and trying to plan in the collective interest. One example I talk about in the book is the clear cutting of old growth forest in the Pacific Northwest, where you had like wobblies, you had like left-wing labor organizers being like, please don't do this. Like, don't take these jobs. You're destroying the conditions for this industry in the future. First of all, like we are going to destroy all timber jobs in this region by doing this and doing what the boss asks you. But also you're destroying this forest for you to enjoy with your children in the future. You're destroying it for everybody. You're killing all these animals. And those loggers went out and like punch people in the face. They would like punch protesters in the face. And that's where a lot of the, you know, archetypical conflict between labor as labor and the left as the left comes from moments like this, where labor is insisting on their particular right and again, particular access to jobs, socially destructive particular jobs, and comes into conflict with the left that does not want to produce those socially destructive particular jobs. And that's a real conflict. That's not one that you can like disappear by being a better person or whatever. Like that's a real thing.
Yell at people and be like, no, be a good person, stop being a shitlord, you know.
And at the same time, the answer is not also workers can't fail, they can only be failed, which is some people's perspective, right? Which is that like, well, if you don't offer them a better job in the same industry, in the same place, then you can't expect them to make the like politically progressive decision. And I don't think that's true either, right? I think like they can do a bad job and make bad decisions, and that unions are capable of saying this is socially deleterious work and it's not work I want to do, even if it's a job that would pay this kind of money. So that's a real conflict. And there's also, like I said, I got 3 for every section. I believe the third one, I'm forgetting. Oh yeah, the third one is that the public power tends to abstract in the way that it thinks about flows of resources, and in this sort of like Sim City perspective of, okay, we need this much lithium and we need this much production capacity. Why don't we just put all the solar plants over here and we'll destroy this one area. We'll turn it into a sacrifice zone, but it'll produce all the energy we need for the rest of the territory or whatever. And that's a real problem. It's a problem in a couple ways. First, you're going to run into people who will fight you for the particular piece of land that they have. So you find yourself in conflict with 500 million indigenous people around the world who have a social metabolic order that is linked to particular pieces of land that you do not understand as well as they do, and your plans will be worse. Yeah, and I talk about an example in Hawaii where there was a water storage plant, or energy storage using water plant planned, and the fisher folk and farmers and indigenous people locally were like, this plan to use these colonial era waterways ignores the fact that there are like 100 years of legacy chemicals in this land, and you're going to drag it all out of the water and put it into the waterways, and you're going to waste all this fresh water that we don't have to waste, and like you don't know what you're talking about, and we know what you're talking about, and it's a bad idea. And this is where abundance perspectives really fail, because they do not understand that is knowledge that is very important for us to hold on to for our own collective interests. And they think you can just sort of push those objections to the side, and you really can't. You absolutely can't. Certainly the left can't. Nor does it mean you don't build anything, right? But it means you have to come to solutions. And so in the West Kauai pump storage plant, the answer was to make it a closed loop system as opposed to an open loop system that was integrated with the water system on the island. And that means it's smaller, and its like scope is different, but it's a much better plan, and it's much more like long-term thinking plan by incorporating that knowledge into it. And public power often has a really hard time doing that, or struggles with that step.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I kind of brought up, actually existing socialism earlier is because, you have these problems of planning. You still have to coordinate different social actors, and you still have to take all these externalities, as they call them, into account. You have many famous instances. Like you brought up Soviet whaling, of course. So I think, just because you've gotten capitalist out of the way doesn't mean that you have gotten all the other kind of issues of social coordination and contestation out of the way as well. You still
no, and they're real. And it doesn't mean that like socialist states that are pumping oil, for example, right, are doing so because they are corrupt or bad. Like doesn't mean that like Maduro isn't producing a bunch of oil because he doesn't believe in climate change, because he's a climate change denier or something like that. It's because in this system he's responsible at a certain degree for the welfare of the people who live in that country, and that welfare is dependent on their access to fossil fuels at a certain level. If you have to like drive from the hills to a medical clinic, which is a real thing that people have to do, that depends on your access to fuel, and subsidized fuel, right? And so that's a real conflict. At the same time, we can't keep doing this. We cannot keep extracting oil and burning it. That's a real contradiction. It's a real conflict, and it's not one we can brush aside. It's one we have to work through in a gajillion different particular instances.
Right. I think, the other issue with public power is just the issue of bureaucracy, of how do you keep public power democratically accountable, which I think is kind of related to the other issues we were talking about, which is, the kind of issue of coordination and, the Sim City planning where people aren't taking these things into account. But
have you guys checked out East von Miserosh at all?
Yes, the Beyond Capital guy. Yeah. I actually dug up my copy of that while I was reading your book.
Yeah, it fucking rules. So I read that book. I guess I read it twice while I was working on this book. Once myself, and then another in a group. And his critique of sort of public power and state socialism is really interesting. And I'm not going to like try and develop it all right now on the stream, but people should check that book out. Like that book will blow people's minds for sure.
Yeah, no, I haven't read it yet, but I've been meaning to for like probably the past like 10 years of my life. It's been one of those things that I keep like meaning to read. And
it's really something. It's very different. And he does that thing that a lot of us do, which is that he like tries to write like Marx, which we all try. A lot of us try to write like Marx. Not all of us, but like a lot of us try to write like Marx. And he's way better at it than most of us are, which makes it a real thrill to like engage with someone who is that capable. And his like lineage is really interesting. He's like a student of Hilferding's, which is
I mean, he kind of comes from the Lukashian tradition, right?
Well, not comes from the Lukashian tradition, is that like he was like Lukash's guy. He was the next in line,
he studied under him.
And has like maybe a quarter of that 1,000-page book is a critique of Lukács. So it's not, he's not a like Lukács extension or whatever. He's his own thing, and it's
that's
really
why I like Lukács, but I like critiques of Lukács that are in the spirit of him and even more. Yeah.
Which is itself what Lukács is, right? Is the critique of Marx in the spirit of Marx.
Yeah, no. So yeah, I've definitely like been meaning to read that soon.
I feel like this is the audience where maybe I can actually hook somebody.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Check out, like, really, especially if you've like got it on your shelf and it's like forbidding or whatever, just like take it like Marx, take it like a little section at a time.
There's definitely some folks in Cosmonaut who've read it and who've discussed it. Like I've said, I've been meaning to get to it. It's just, you know how it is. There's like, you know.
I do. There's and so consider this at least just a vouch, pushing it up people's list a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I dug it up because I was able to get a pretty decently priced copy and not too long ago. And so yeah, I'm definitely going to be reading that fairly soon. Yeah,
theoretically, I end up like, I think, really close to where he ends up, which is communism. He's a communist, but his particular understanding of it, which is one that inspired a lot of like the Venezuelan communal project, not the Venezuelan state project as a whole, but particular aspects of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No.
Yeah. So I think
I read monthly review. Like I get.
So if you read monthly review, you'll hear a lot of like references and a lot.
And I've picked up a lot of his ideas from reading monthly review. So.
But if you read the like the big ass book itself, the writing's awesome. He really puts it down. And if you're like a Marxist who likes reading Marx, definitely check out Beyond Capital. It is what it says on the package for sure.
Yeah. All right, guys, read Beyond Capital. Read Beyond Capital. I'm going to be reading it soon. I've been meaning to, like I said, for a while. So maybe that will be like my next big project. I need to read Unequal Exchange soon too. That's another one of my big ones. But
for sure.
So I think, public power. I think. How would you differentiate it? How would you describe communism in relation to public power? What makes communism like? What step does communism go next from public power? Is it, getting rid of money? I think that's part of it. I think I'm like an anti-money person. Ultimately, but it's about communal organization, right? And the communal organization means the organization according to your collective needs and abilities. And there are a lot of modifiers that I use in the chapter to talk about what are other aspects or implications of that for communism. But I think there are a lot of implications from that. And one that Messerich talks about a lot is that you can't have a sort of centralized political body that operates outside of society, to which other parts of society are accountable to outside of itself. And that represents the inequality of peoples and a structure of inequality that reproduces itself throughout society. That would be the state in kind of the Marxist sense, wouldn't it?
Yes. And so
abstract sense.
So the communism is an anti-state communism ultimately, and that you're organized not in states but in communes. The organize of society communally. It really is about communal existence. And I talk about that's not everything, right? You also need some more aspects for like the kind of communism that we want, because communism is a very like broad historical category, and even like super historical category, probably. And so I talk about like the ruthless critique of everything ever existing and what that looks like in practice as a communal value. I talk about Abdullah Öcalan and Rose theory and the idea of collective self-defense and the right to self-defense. And self-defense is a practice that is natural to beings, living things, not as a political right, but as a right of a characteristic of living things. So yeah, it's about breaking this connection between value and life rather than just attenuating it, which is, I think, what public power or state socialism is ultimately going to do, and about the realization of true equality of all people and all peoples.
Nice, nice. I think,
yeah, it's sweet. I think people will dig it if you guys want to check it out.
yeah, no, communism is a good idea. You know, the abolition of classes, you know, the abolition of the state. All that stuff is good. I think the question to me is always, how do we get there?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, do you kind of do you see communism coming out of public power, or do you see so I guess where does where do you kind of take the influence of the communization theory in all of this? Because I can definitely see the influence of communization theory, like stuff like endnotes, theory communiste,
Yeah,
theories of Dave, for example.
Sure. Yeah, I've
situationism.
Even actually read Dave.
You're not missing out on much.
No, I'm saying I have. I've read.
Oh, you have read Dave.
I've in fact actually read Dave.
Yeah, no, I think theory communists are a bit stronger than Dave.
Well, and I'm from the endnotes world, and that I'm from NorCal. I think of endnotes still as California communism to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Which is where I'm at. I didn't end up writing for them ever, but those folks are comrades. And I think you can see that influence actually in the end, where I'm talking about what are we going to all do? Like, what is the next step for the left as a whole? Which I think is I offer and I guess I'll close with this. I have to get out of here in 5 minutes. A speculative construct that I call disaster councils, which I think that a lot of that endnotes type stuff has also been flowing into council communism, and Jasper Burns's new book, which people should definitely check out. It's about re-envisioning that lineage around the council form. But where I end up is that we're going to live in this future, we're living in this present that is full of disasters. The state and the capitalist state and the forces that be have particular plans that are not good for us, right? There are plans to reinstall and further inequality, to build more walls and to build more guns. And that it's up to us as civil society, as people, as the left, to step up and into that organizing vacuum and start organizing people from where they are in order to deal with the disasters that we know are coming. And that doesn't mean, I think it's a little different from the DSA project, let's say, which is about reproducing everyone as a certain kind of citizen or whatever. I think we need to look at where people are, and we need to organize the pharmacists in the place where we live and say, in the event of a flood, we need to have the pharmacists organized so that people can get access to the medication they need, whether or not they have the doctor's note or whether or not they have the money, or regardless, that we need to solve these problems with the people who are going to be actually solving them, right? We need to organize grocery store workers so that we have access to baby formula and can figure out a plan for what we're going to do to distribute that baby formula in the event of a fire or a flood, so that people are not lined up outside or struggling to feed their families in this situation. And I think that's not just about mutual aid or charity, but is about building power. And that it's that's planning. When you say we're going to do this, these are the way that things are going to go, and we're going to plan to do it and arrange the social resources to accomplish it, and then actualize it. That's building power. And this is the kind of power we can build on the left across this whole spectrum, right? We can involve everyone from sympathetic small business owners all the way to the Black Bloc, where everyone's named after an animal or whatever, this is the whole field. And all of those people can be my comrades. And we don't have to raise $1 billion to do it. We can do it from where we are right now. We don't have to take over the Democratic Party. We don't have to change what we believe. We don't have to lie. And we can do this now. And so I offer that as a kind of provocation about what does the next step forward look like. And I think you could think about that as a kind of communization, right? That is a disaster communization is maybe the plan. And I think the disasters provide for that opening, but it's also disaster is going to categorize our everyday life more and more. Like at a certain point,
that is true.
We're going to stop. We will say like, oh, well, that's just about, you know, power in this particular situation of a disaster. And then you go back to normal or whatever. Then you have disaster capitalism. Then you have the shock doctrine, whatever. But that's not the case, right? Like we're going to be becoming more and more emergency situations until it's full-time emergency situation. And I don't think the powers that be are prepared to be in that emergency situation. And so it's either going to be us or it's going to be the other guys. And the other guys are getting ready. And they're getting ready with militias, they're getting ready with guns, they're getting ready with walls. And we need to get a lot more ready. We need to be more ready than they are. And right now we're not. And I don't see anything that's stopping us from doing that right now, which is not the case with a bunch of other left-wing strategies. So that was my like concluding, what does the communization perspective have to offer the entire left? Which is really what the whole book is what does the, like, you know, what does value form theory have to offer the whole left? What does communization have to offer the whole left? Because that's where I am. And I want to offer something to this whole spectrum, not just the narrow people who already agree with me. Because I think there's more to offer. I think there's something to offer that whole spectrum of folks. And I hope people take me up on my offer. You'll find yourself in there. If you don't find yourself in there, send me an email.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess, you know, the way I can kind of, I guess, you know, using your kind of ideas here of like market crafting, public power, and communism, I could kind of see like a transition to communism happening where, like, you know, you have like a sector of the economy where you still have like markets, but you have like, you know, it's still like tightly controlled by like a democratic authority, and the markets are like, you still have like some small businesses and like artisanal stuff, but it's still like tightly controlled, and like you have like councils like trying to like get people to form co-ops. Then you have like a sector of the economy that's like state monopoly capitalist, like public power or whatever, that's like still like, you know, state centralized or whatever, but it's you know, it's like state capitalist sector, I guess, of the economy. And then you would have like a sector of the economy that's like increasingly just fully communist, where everything is just being directly distributed for free without any kind of like mediation or whatever. Like and there's already parts of the economy, I think.
Oh yeah.
You know, there's all kinds of stuff that you could just directly communize easily, right?
Here's hoping. Yeah, well, that's one of the better scenarios that you're describing, right? And so
the idea, you know, in my ideal situation, like eventually the entire economy would move into the communist sector, right?
Well, and I really like the idea of withering, the state withering. I've sort of been, you know, rejected that idea or not believe that that's something that could happen. But the more I think about it, like the non-political and non-class power aspects of the state, yeah, it could wither into a power company, like for sure. Like the people who are doing a state power company could just do the power company. And it doesn't have to be organized by the state. They could be people who do this power installation or whatever, or who organize this power network. And like those are useful things that a state structure could wither into or devolve into. And I could see that happening. Like that doesn't sound crazy to me. Like the people who run the nuclear power plant or run the pump storage hydro power facility or whatever, they could still do that, and they could do that in the auspices of that thing itself and in the collective interest rather than some external political thing. So if you're interested in that stuff, read István Mészáros for sure.
Awesome. Well, Malcolm, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me and for everyone who tuned in.
All right. I think, yeah, it's a very interesting conversation. I think some people will be reading Mészáros.
All right. And mine too. Don't forget mine. You should read my book too.
Definitely. I'm definitely going to be reading Palo Alto soon. Like I said, I'm going to be going to California soon. It's been a while since I've been there, so.
Well, those are like the they live glasses for California, right?
Yeah, no,
You're gonna get there, and you're gonna be.
I need to see the dark truth beneath.
All fucked up about what's really there. It's like the beginning of Blue Velvet or whatever. It's
Yeah,
all,
I need to see
not,
the dark
not
truth behind the mirror, beneath
right.
all the sunshine and the, you know, the good vibes that
Exactly.
are hiding dark evil behind it all. All right, well, have a good rest of your Sunday, and keep in touch.
Catch you guys. And if anyone who's watching wants to reach out about something that they heard or whatever, my email is really easy to find. I trust you to find it.
Awesome.
All
right, guys. So I was having very well.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting conversation.
So, I don't know. Anything in the news you wanted to talk about? Anything interesting?
I guess not to beat the horse again, but the Epstein stuff is kind of heating.
You read my mind. You read my mind.
I think the last thing I heard was they had an interview with Ghislaine Maxwell and produced some names, and some names are coming out. But of course, it's gonna, you know, it's not gonna include Trump. I think the idea here is to like produce a list of names to get the heat off of him.
Yeah, no, they're doing a cover up here. They're doing a cover up.
But I really gotta wonder, like, what's gonna be I guess, like, how this is gonna end or how this is gonna develop, because it's been really clumsy. Like, it's been just very clumsy on Trump's part and all those people. And I don't think anybody's really buying it.
Yeah, no, listen, the way this is going is people are just going fucking insane. People are just losing their minds. Like we're gonna see like a million Timothy McVeighs. Not a million Timothy McVeighs, but like we're gonna see like a ton of people just completely lose their minds because the whole like conspiracy narrative that so many of these people like believed in is like falling apart. But they're still gonna believe in the conspiracy narrative, but they're not going to like the whole MAGA communism idea that some people believe in, that they're going to like become MAGA communists. That's not going to happen. But you know, they're not going to like stop believing in like the kind of narrative of QAnon. But they're not going to have like the Trump father figure to like provide the guidance. So we're just going to have a million schizoid fucking nut jobs going in all kinds of different directions, and it's not going to be good for society probably. But
right, I think it's going to be like a lot of cope, a lot of people coping in every different direction, and there are going to be people that take advantage of that to, you know, do the QAnon type thing where they create new conspiracy theories and new things to cope anew. And I mean, I sort of think you're right. Who the fuck is to say, man? There's no way to tell the future, but I do kind of think that it's gonna crash people out basically. Especially because like MAGA is not a democratic movement, so there is no way to actually, for these people to actually register their disaffection and, you know, change the movement as it were. So they sort of just have to accept it. Yep.
Hold on. This is Joe Rogan's CIA handler came on.
Oh yeah.
And no, it's good stuff.
We thought Trump was going to come in, and a lot of things are going to be resolved. Yeah. We're going to drain the swamp. We're going to figure everything out.
We're going to drain the swamp. We're going to figure it out.
You have this one hardcore line in the sand that everybody had been talking about forever, and then they're trying to gaslight you on that.
Well, you would have thought that
Is that your phone?
Yeah, I hope not. Oh, it's my wife. Should I answer?
Silent, buddy.
Yeah, it's on. You know, it was on silent, but it's still
trying
goes.
to
How does that
distract
happen?
from what you just said.
My phone is
doesn't
compromised.
trust you. You're friends with me.
Well,
they don't trust you anymore.
They did call me this morning. What are you going to talk about? I said, I don't know.
Joe Rogan's CIA handler is back in the studio to set things straight after everything that's been going on since Rogan took a short European holiday with his family. So now that Joe's back, it makes sense that Mike Baker would make an appearance on JRE. He's got this uncanny ability to turn up at the most fortuitous
this guy
times
always comes
to walk
on
Joe
whenever
through
like
what's
Joe Rogan
really
gets,
going on behind the
whenever
scenes.
Joe Rogan gets
People
too
have
far
been
from
calling it in the
narrative,
comments for a couple of
Whenever he
weeks
starts
now,
to slip.
saying things like, it's only a matter of time before Mike Baker makes an appearance on JRE to give us the CIA's narrative on Epstein. And the comments in this episode did not disappoint either. Mike Baker once again changing the batteries for the bugs he put in Joe's studio. All right, let's see what the CIA's position on current events
Everybody
is.
knows what's going on, man.
So
Like,
I think I've
nobody-
actually figured out how Mike Baker's been bugging Joe's studio. If you recall, last time he was in there, I pointed out that he holds his cigar in a very strange way. And this time I again noticed he holds his pen in a strange way as well, which led me to conclude that the bug is in the pen. Joe's probably always wondering why Mike accidentally leaves his pens behind every time he visits the studio, so he keeps them for him in a little tin in the middle of the table. That's why you never actually see Mike writing with the pen. It's just a placeholder in his hand until he's ready to leave it behind. But as you saw in the intro there was quite a bit of talk about the CIA in this episode, much more than usual, and a lot of it was Mike defending the agency and playing down his relationship with them.
Of course.
We have a really nice relationship. They don't tell me what to say. If I go on TV to talk about something,
Yeah, they don't tell me
just
what to say.
So is he like
it's
active
not like they can call up
CIA?
and say, "Well, here's our view on this."
They trust you.
Yeah, they trust me. I'm not going to open my yap and talk
Hold on,
sources
let
and
me
methods.
look up.
And just talk from an operational perspective. But yeah, so that was my wife. Which reminds me, it's my boy Muggsy's birthday
Former, it
today.
says on
Happy
the-
birthday,
yeah.
Muggsy.
Yeah,
I guess there's no such thing as
Shout out to
Yeah, there's no
Mugsy,
such
happy
thing as-
birthday, brother. And shout out to the other two, Schmucko and Fucko as well. Sounds like such a wholesome family. But as usual, guys, there's absolutely nothing to see here. Everything is completely normal. Just keep calm and carry on. Rogan's just out here asking questions, so don't expect him to have the answers or to provide any sort of pushback against his guests who come on his show to spout their narratives. And even though Joe has access to all the people involved in this, for some reason he routinely asks questions after the fact that he could have easily asked them when they were actually on his show, sitting across from him in the studio.
Come on, Skip.
Stuff is so crazy because
Yeah.
when Cash Patel was on here and he was
Oh,
like,
Cash
"There's
Patel,
no,
God, that's another
there's nothing,"
fucking-
and I was like, "What are you talking?"
yeah.
I didn't even know what to say. My thought was, and people are like, "Why didn't you push back more?" My thought was like, "I'm just going to put this out there and let the internet do its work because there's nothing I can." The guy's saying there's no tapes, there's no video. That doesn't make any sense. He didn't know about the Michael Baden stuff, the autopsy stuff, where it showed that he had 3 broken bones in his neck, which never happens. He's like, "Well, we have a film. We're going to release that film," and the film has a f***ing minute missing from it.
Yeah.
Like, do you think we're babies? Like, what is this?
Also, you got people, including Dan Bongino, right, making bank for a couple of years talking about how awful it is, and we got to get this. And this is a huge conspiracy, and then you release a 2-page memo that says, "Yeah, there's nothing to see here."
Yeah, because you're
You know?
walking by your bedroom window and you see a little laser,
Yeah.
little red laser moving across
Yeah.
your chest. But how does Pam Bondi say we have thousands of hours? And then Cash Patel says we don't have anything. And then Tim Dillon said he has lunch with J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance says that 10,000 hours is commercial pornography.
Right. Yeah. You think this freak show of Epstein wasn't like it didn't have hidden cameras or wasn't taped or whatever? I mean, come on.
100%.
So
100%.
It's so obvious that Rogan hasn't figured out exactly what's going on here. It's so plain and simple for everyone to see but himself. Every single one of Rogan's guests has an agenda, whether it's a comedian, an author, filmmaker, or scientist, but when it comes to politicians, they're all compromised in different ways. That's what he doesn't seem to understand.
seems to not
Getting
really
the
understand
FBI
what's
director,
going on
Cash
here.
Patel, on the show when Elon Musk was dropping bombs on Twitter,
just think he's a useful
accusing
idiot.
Trump of being on the Epstein list, and and seeing him squirm and weasel his way out of discussing it should have been the clearest sign yet that his guests are all compromised. There's so much to unpack here, so I'm going to go through it step by step. I'm even going to give you a hot take on what I think's really going on with Trump and the Epstein list, which I don't usually do, but you know what? Fuck it. I'm already balls deep in this shit as it is. And so when it comes to compromised guests, it's never been more obvious that Mike Baker is still a company man. People joke that he's Rogan's CIA handler, but after watching this episode, it's never been clearer to me that he really is. Just listen to the way he fumbles his way through this answer to Joe's question and reveals the real reason he turned up to Joe's studio that day.
What do you think, from your perspective, what do you think that was all about? Who do you think was involved in that? Do you think it was the Mossad? Do you think it was some rogue intelligence agency in America? Was it a coordinated effort?
You know what? I know this. There's a lot of talk about. Did he have some sort of intel connection? Right.
Right.
That from my perspective, it's complete speculation. But I will say, like from an operational perspective, if you see a guy like this who's super connected and all the way back to 2008 was like his first trial, right? So he's had a long history of these problems. If I'm Chinese intel, right, and I just read the goddamn entertainment news, and there's these rumors and allegations of high-level people flying off to his island, I'm going to think that's interesting. So if I can get somebody right inside that operation, whether it's Ghislaine Maxwell, or whether it's Epstein himself, whether it's somebody who's just on the outskirts of it, maybe I'll start picking up some pretty interesting leverageable information on people that maybe I want to influence.
Wait a second. So he's saying that it was China. Did I hear that correctly? I'm not hearing you, Joseph.
My bad. He seems to be suggesting that it's like a Chinese intelligence operation. At least that's what I heard him say. He was like, if I was the Chinese and I saw the business news. He sort of sounds like that's what he's saying.
Oh my God. That's really what they're going to go with here. They're going to try to blame this on China so when we go to war with China, this is part of their ammunition. It's like, oh, well, actually it was China that did Epstein, not Israel.
If that doesn't convince you this guy still reports to Langley, then I've got a
this guy's
See the way he gave the most basic answer possible, but slipped China into the fray. He gave the most high-level basic explanation of what everybody already knows, but made sure to use China as an example and not the CIA or Mossad. This next bit, though, was kind of disturbing. I don't get why nobody's pulled Joe aside and explained to him that when he says things like this, it's really not a good look and makes it real hard to defend.
And it's so funny to me that it's always comes down to like carnal needs. When you get to like this Bill Gates level and Bill Clinton level, you can't just go pick up gals at the bar.
Yeah,
you know
it's
what
a little
I mean?
tough. Yeah.
So if you're a super famous super freak, and you like chasing skirts, but you can't do it. Like, what do you do?
Well, you do what he did, right? Which is you get somebody to procure for you, which apparently was primarily Maxwell's job. She was clearly operating as his pimp, or whatever the female version of a pimp is.
Curator.
Curator. Yeah, it's a curator.
Yeah. No. The word isn't curator. The word you guys are looking for is trafficker. You know how Ghislaine Maxwell is currently serving 20 years for trafficking? She's not in prison for curating. That's what fucking museums do.
Yeah.
And Rogan said all of this stuff before about how a lot of these guys were super high profile. They couldn't just go in public, so they needed someone to traffic teenage girls for them. Bro, what are you even saying? We're not talking about blind dates here or a double date with a friend. We're talking about serious crimes here. These guys really need to quit downplaying the severity of the Epstein situation. As usual, though, things only get worse.
Mecca break.
You need to get ad block.
Yeah.
I can't speak to, the rumors about him working for one intel agency or another, but I will say, if I'm working for an intel agency and I see something like that, yeah, I might find that of interest, right?
Oh, for
and then
sure.
I would definitely go after somebody to see what's going on.
It's the easiest connect the dots puzzle
Right.
of all time.
Yeah.
You got
Yeah.
rich, powerful people and hot chicks and probably drugs.
Yeah.
And cameras.
Yeah.
Gee.
No, Joe, buddy, we're not talking about hot chicks here, mate. We're talking about children.
Talking about
And
underage girls. Oh my
Exactly.
God.
That's
Bro,
a,
you've
he's
got
done.
two young
He's done that a
daughters
few
as well.
times now.
That's honestly
it
crazy
seems
to me how he
intentional.
keeps saying shit like this. And it's not the
And,
first time. Almost every single time he's discussing
Yes,
Epstein on the
King,
podcast,
they
he
really are
says
trying to
something
push
along
Epstein
those
on
lines.
China.
And it just
Believe
comes
it or
off as
not, that
some
really
sick
is the
fantasy.
bullshit they're
It's
trying
almost
to
like
push
he
on
relates to the rich and powerful men who were hanging around Epstein more than he identifies as the father of the kids who were abused by them. But at this point, Mike Baker had finished planting the seed that the CIA had nothing to do with it, and it was probably China. Now it was time for him to start watering the soil and throw Russia into the mix.
Oh
And
boy.
I tell you, the Russians love nothing better than, the truth. The reality is, in terms of recruiting an asset by using blackmail is tough, right? You gotta that window starts closing immediately. You're blackmailing somebody for their cooperation. At some point, that's going to go south on you, right? But having said that, look, the Russians in particular love that, right? The Chinese intel, they'll do whatever works from their perspective. The agency, again, people are going to say that's bullshit. The agency tries, the blackmail is never really ever on the table as an option because
But assassinations and
leads to a
everything else
problem.
are.
In what way? What do you mean?
Well,
by this?
the asset will turn on you, right? The next thing you know, you've got an agent working now, a double agent working for the other side, right? Because they're so
Those paragons
over
of
by the
virtue at
fact
the
that they've been
CIA.
blackmailed.
I know. Come
and
on.
at some point they lose their shit. They decide to roll for the other side.
But
that you're
aren't
working
you like
against.
constantly monitoring them and looking at their phone?
There's
and
only
all-
so much. No, not really. There's only so much you can do.
There's only so much
So
CIA.
that's the operational reason for trying to avoid blackmail, right? Has it ever been done? Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it hasn't been done.
Of course.
But some services go to it much quicker than others do. Yeah.
And which services?
And I
are
would,
those?
well, again, the Russians are primary users of something like that. They don't, because they've got a shotgun
Israelis?
approach. Yeah, Israelis have been known to do that in the honeypot operations that they'll do and other things. But the Russians throw a lot of shit at the wall and see what sticks.
He always
hold on.
diverts
So
to the
now,
Russians.
according to Mike
He doesn't
Baker,
want to talk about
the
his.
CIA running the Epstein op would have been too unethical for them to have ever been involved. Let's just unpack that for a minute. The organization who brought you Project MK Ultra, one of the biggest domestic wiretapping controversies in history, all of the known human rights abuses, the Iran-Contra affair, drug trafficking to fund operations, hiding covert operations from Congress, and the most infamous of all, allegedly orchestrating the JFK assassination. After all of that, blackmailing rich dudes is supposedly too unethical for them to pull off. That has to be one of the biggest lies I've ever seen a JRE guest say to Rogan. And Joe just sat there nodding his head. He didn't
So
even think to bring up the
credulous.
prosecutor who claimed he was told not to touch Epstein because he belongs to intelligence. Why the fuck would an American prosecutor be forced to protect a Russian or Chinese intelligence operation? Like, Joe, what is actually going on in that head of yours when your guest lies straight to your face like that? And when he brought up Israel, Mike dismisses it and says, yeah, nah, it's probably Russia. So let me get this straight. The CIA thinks that the Jeffrey Epstein operation was orchestrated by China or Russia, an operation that saw the trafficking of American teenage girls to compromise and influence the most powerful men in America, and this is their response.
It's funny because with the agency, it's not like the Bureau. The agency, I think most people honestly don't really probably give a shit about the Epstein files. They're more concerned now about this release from Tulsi Gabbard and the talk about, manipulating intelligence, for the 2016 election,
Right.
and Russian collusion and all of that. That speaks more to the agency than the Epstein files does.
Well, tickle me pink and call me fucking Elmo. Austin, we've got a problem. Rogan's so open-minded that his brains fell out. This is like that scene where Hannibal feeds Paul his own brain. What's the main course? Oh, he should never ask. It spoils the surprise. What Joe should really be saying is, come on, what's in the box? But that's not nearly the end of it, because if you thought that this was the end of the CIA speak, wait until you see this next clip where Mike Baker simultaneously claims that the names on the list are super important, yet probably don't matter at all.
One of the great challenges in this
Oh
work
God, Neil deGrasse
is knowing
Tyson.
enough about.
Everybody's worried now, right? No, at first it was like, okay, again, I go back a handful of years. Nobody was pushing for this, right? Because you got people from all sides probably on whatever that list looks like, whatever that Epstein file looks like, whoever was involved.
It's Schrodinger's list.
All right, there's kind of this bizarre bipartisan moment where we're not going to push for this, really. We're not going to make a big effort here. We're not sending anybody from DOJ. The Dems aren't, during the Biden administration, calling for the release of the files. Now, all of a sudden, they smell, blood in the water. Nobody's going to look good from this. But I would caution, just because a name might be in a file, no matter whose it is, doesn't necessarily mean there's nefarious activity. And this person was there. Doesn't mean they're connected to something awful. They weren't f***ing underage girls. Maybe they were if they're in the file, right? But I'm just saying there's a lot of people probably in that file that are going to be named, if it ever comes out, who may or may not have been engaged in illegal activity, but just release the goddamn things.
So just because they're on the list doesn't mean they necessarily did anything illegal. But if they are in the file, they probably did. Either way, the CIA had nothing to do with it. It was probably China or Russia. So just release the goddamn thing. Bro, can you hear the word salad coming out of your fucking mouth? I've never heard anyone hype something up and downplay it in the same sentence. It's not that Mike Baker thinks Joe Rogan's stupid enough to believe everything he's saying. He knows Joe Rogan's stupid enough to believe everything he's saying. I am absolutely convinced that this was a CIA Mossad joint operation, and this next clip made me realize why.
The Epstein situation is going to be so disappointing to so many people now because I have this theory that nothing ever gets done in Washington, D.C., right? Investigations go to die there. Nothing ever happens. There's never any real consequences of any nature. And we got all sorts of things happening right now, right? So the Epstein case is just one of them. Regardless of who else is in the files, right? And the Dems, I think, were worried for quite some time and didn't pursue it because, years back they were thinking, okay, Clinton's going to be embarrassed. We don't want that. Right. So, again, my point would be just release everything.
The fact that Mike's saying that nothing gets investigated properly in Washington and that it doesn't matter who's on the list from both sides, they should just release it and be done with it so we can focus on the more important issues at the moment, made me realize something. If this really was a CIA Mossad joint operation, the Department of Justice, FBI, Congress, and the White House don't know the details. Why would Mike be so keen to release the files if he knows the CIA was involved? It could only be because he knows nothing in the files can implicate them. That says to me that the actual files everyone's fighting over don't actually explain the full extent of the operation and probably only contain the ground level names and the videos without exposing the faceless men behind the scenes running the show. Mike's basically saying the files you're all talking about will only scratch the surface, so let's just release them and be done with it because you ain't never going to get to the bottom of it.
Damn.
Going back to, I know I'm bouncing around here, but going back to the Epstein thing, I don't understand how they handled this so poorly, right? For Pam Bondi to come out and talk about the files and oh my God,
Right.
and then like within a blink of an eye, they come out with this bullshit Sunday night memo saying there's nothing to see. How
think
could
there's
they
just a
possibly
lack
have
of
thought?
coordination?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I do.
that
I think
makes
it's
sense.
I think it's a messaging problem is always kind of a key element of the Trump administration. I'm just saying, a hallmark of a Trump administration is the ability to have a self-inflicted wound, shoot yourself in the foot because of messaging usually.
All right, so at the beginning of this video, I told you guys I was going to give you my take on why Trump doesn't want the files to come out. I'm just some guy on the internet, so obviously take this with a grain of salt. I feel like if Trump was on the list or there was incriminating evidence against him involving trafficking or something similar, it would have come out already. The CIA doesn't like him. If they had something like that, I think they would have already used it to get rid of him. But I don't reckon Trump is worried about being on the list. I think he used the Epstein saga to tap into the young male audience to get elected. He got guys like Rogan, Schultz, the Nelk Boys, Theo Von, and Logan Paul on side. He was finally going to give everyone an inside look into the shadows of government and expose all the corruption. But then once he got into office again, he realized how bad the Epstein files really were, how far-reaching and wide they are, and figured that if he dropped it all to the public, it would wreck the rest of his presidency. He probably finally realized how damaging it would be to the country, that it would clean out Congress and corporate America, fuck the stock market, and cause a recession, etc., etc. And he thought, do I really want to be the one who does this to my country? It'll ruin the rest of my second term. I'll spend the rest of my presidency rebuilding Washington. I don't know. To me, Trump's a businessman. He doesn't really seem like he's committed to ripping apart the US government and ruining his beloved stock market. He's used to winning. The whole Epstein thing is a distraction from how well he thinks he's doing, and he's even literally said that, right? Who cares about Epstein? We all have this other shit going on. Look how much we're winning, etc.
I think that
so it sounds to me like he used it as an election promise to get people on
I think
board
that the Democrats
and just hope that everyone would forget about it and move on to the next thing. Except that's not going to happen. I don't know. It's either that or he's plain and simple on the list and there's incriminating evidence against him. At this point, honestly, who the fuck knows? Anyway, don't forget to check out the link in the description to my Patreon.
Bro, this whole thing stinks to high heaven.
Yeah, I think he's on the list, but I mean, I think it is kind of true that like releasing it would probably like set society on fire. And like,
I guess it depends on how big and who's on that list, but I don't know. I mean, it's impossible to say without it happening.
But it's also like, let's say evidence that aliens are real came out. Real evidence that aliens are real came out. Like,
would that actually change?
Would that actually change anything in society? Not really. Probably not. Like, would it really like change that much about society if like the truth about Epstein came out or something like that? Like, I don't know.
I mean, it really depends on how wide that net is cast, right?
Yeah.
Because I imagine it would contribute even more so to the idea of like that people have that the government's not legitimate or like they can't trust it or whatever else. So, but I don't know if it would collapse society necessarily.
But either way, like the way they're handling it right now is like contributing enough to like people's distrust of the government. But
that's what I don't get about this whole thing is that on the one, it's almost entirely self-inflicted. He didn't have to run on Epstein shit if he knew he was on the list. He didn't have to hire Bongino and Kash Patel, who are like noted Epstein conspiracy theorists. But the other part of this that stinks to me is that he seems to be leaning heavily on like the podcast people. Like he seems to be leaning on like, did you see the Tim Dillon thing? Tim Dillon had like that I unfortunately sat through, like an hour and a half of him sort of making excuses for Trump, and he kept like dropping the idea that like, oh, he has a back channel to the administration essentially. It's like these guys are like mobilizing the podcast people to do their PR. That to me stinks.
Yeah,
it's like that would really suggest to me like that there's a there. If they're like if they're going so hard to mobilize people like Tim Dillon and Theo Von and Joe Rogan, like it sounds to me like there's something here.
Hold on, I just found a clip from Tim Dillon.
The weirdest show I've ever seen was that. He's like, his comments were like, "Oh, Tim Dillon is compromised."
Yeah, no, Tim.
Bro, no one knows how Epstein got his money. No one to this day can answer that question. How did he make billions of dollars? Was it just financial advice? How did he even get? Yeah. How did he even get into?
Yeah, that's the thing is like nobody has an in-depth history of Epstein's business history. That's the most interesting thing to me is how the fuck did he make that money? What is his business history? Right. That's really what I want to know more than the client list.
Nobody knows.
Hold on, I'm gonna type in Tim Dillon on X and see what comes up. Oh, it looks like he's calling for cutting off funding to Israel. So, I guess that's good. Oh, Courtesy Arvin was on there. That's not good.
Yeah, that's cursed.
God. How are these people real? Yeah, I think I found something.
And people are saying it's Mossad and CIA and that they're shutting it down or the people in the White House are implicated. I'm taking another path. I'm going, whatever. It's time to live in the, it's just like what I just gave the people advice to, the people, it's late at night, but the people that I just gave advice to about the house slave and everything in the way that you, the composure that you should have in someone's home. I'm giving advice to people now that live in this country. Choose the pedophile you agree with. Choose the pedophile whose values are yours. Who is the pedophile who has a pro-business attitude?
Pro-business pedophile. Choose the pro-business
who cares about the climate? Bro. Is the pedophile who wants better schools? Probably all of them. What pedophile has the viewpoint that you align with? What pedophile believes in infrastructure? Who is the pedophile that's going to keep us out of costly foreign wars? Who is the pedophile who's going to make sure your children have a shot at the American dream? You cannot ask that they don't fuck kids. You cannot ask that.
This is the cope they're going with?
Far.
Like,
yeah, it is.
This is the cope they're going with?
Who is the pedophile that when they speak, you go, man, I relate to that guy. Not on everything. Not on everything. Not on everything. Not on the having sex with kids, which I'm sure he does because all of them do. But God, do I relate to the point he made about tech or whatever? I don't know, but that's the thing now. You just have to go with the pedophile who makes the most sense to you personally. And you're going to argue with your wife about it. It's not going to be easy. John, he's a pedophile. Honey, listen. Our taxes have been going up year after year. It's hard to pay the rent. Don't you want to own a fucking house? Johnny has sex with children. Honey, listen to me. I don't agree with everything this man does. John, this isn't about policy. He's a pedophile. Honey, I understand your concerns, but I work all goddamn week and I can't get ahead. And they're all pedophiles. I want this pedophile.
Yeah, I
He's
get
going to
the
be
point, Tim Dillon. So.
Yeah. It's the weirdest fucking cope. And that whole show was basically him just repeatedly suggesting that Trump has nothing to do with this. So it's pretty transparent what the point of it was.
Man, see, that's the thing, though, is like these kind of scandals, like they kind of just make people like more cynical and like more just detached from politics, or just like, well, they're all just a bunch of pedophiles, so might as well just vote for the pedophile who is going to lower my taxes, or the pedophile who's funny, or just not vote at all and just not care about any of this stuff. Like, you saw this in like the 1970s with like Watergate and like, you know, the Vietnam War. Like, people just become like really like cynical and nihilistic even. And
yeah,
so that's like a potential like outcome of all of this stuff. And if, you know, the genocide in Gaza as well, like, you know, people like just kind of failing to do anything to stop it. That's another problem, is people might become really cynical and attached because of the failures of the left and of the solidarity movement to do anything around that, you know.
There's the cynicism, the powerlessness, and like also the idea of like the righteous fury that people have of like, you know, the cabal of pedophiles or whatever. Like, to go back to what you were saying about this producing 1,000 Timothy McVeighs, like, yeah, I can sort of see that in the sense that some people will get the idea that the only way that they can do anything about it is to go directly to the sword.
Yeah, exactly. So, oh man, it's going to be ugly. And, you know, with the kind of stuff we're seeing in Gaza and in Palestine right now, I think it's just a whole cauldron of terror and evil being built up in the world right now. I really think it's going to be an interesting next decade politically, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I see a lot of darkness.
Yeah, there's a lot of darkness, and so we need to outline a progressive and pro-social vision for the future that can offer people a way forward that's compelling, and because otherwise I don't know, people are going to be going down dark paths, and the kind of nihilism and despair that we're seeing right now is not going to be good. Did you see the Nelk boys?
Is that the one with Netanyahu?
Yeah, they interviewed Netanyahu, and
bro, being a podcaster is like, it's like being in the SS now. Like, what the?
I know.
What the hell are these people doing?
But before we close off, I wanted to show the clip of them. Like, they had no idea. Like, do you know who these Nelk Boy guys are? Like,
no, I don't. I've never watched them.
Yeah, I guess if they're on Kick, which is like the which is like the lowest of the low of stream, I guess, platforms. But so I guess we should probably be on there. but
I'm not that desperate.
They had Netanyahu on, and there was a funny they got some shit from they got shit from both Nick Fuentes and Hassan Piker and Adam Friedland. It was really funny seeing like their response. But hold on, I thought the way they responded to this was pretty funny.
It's a good point. Someone said having Netanyahu on is like having modern day Hitler.
No, I saw that.
Which is, honestly, guys, I'll be honest. I'm here to. It's a good point. I like. We're here to fucking learn, to be honest, guys.
We're here to learn from Hitler.
Said,
we're here to learn, guys. We're here to learn.
God. They're giving money to the wrong people. I swear
Honestly,
to God.
I might have to download that and like use it as like an outro clip. Like, that is like one of the funniest clips I've ever seen. Us King Mob asks, are you following the Handala and Global Smooth Flotilla? I saw they got arrested by the IDF. Let me look that up. We can close out talking about that. I think I just found it.
These guys are sick.
So I guess they did another freedom flotilla to try to break the siege on Gaza. I think the one person I know of who was on this one was Smalls from Amazon Union.
He was on this?
What was that?
He was on the.
Yeah, he was on this boat. Yeah, this is just so ridiculous. These fucking thugs. Yeah, I mean, they need to just keep sending these boats, to be honest. Like,
yeah,
and the whole fleet of them. Like, I mean, the IDF is gonna keep doing this, but fuck it. Like, just give them more trouble.
Yeah, but make them report that Israel is stopping shipments of aid.
Yeah,
you know, make them report it.
At the very least, like, make them divert their resources. You know.
Yeah.
And yeah, they went on a hunger strike apparently. So I guess they're probably being detained in Israel right now. They'll probably be. I don't know what's going to happen. They detained Greta and the crew that she was with, and they eventually let her go.
Yeah.
They were gonna make them watch some stupid footage of October 7th or some shit, but I think or whatever. I know, they just need to keep doing this. Just keep doing it until the siege stops. Keep escalating. You know, more and more people are writing op-eds, you know, finally like saying that the war is bad now. Like, you see Roger finally decided that the war is no longer just.
So at what point does it become politically like damaging for them? I mean, there has been damage, but at what point do they stand down here?
Well, they claimed that they opened the humanitarian corridor today, but like everyone I follow on Twitter who's in Gaza says that they haven't seen any aid come in, and they airdropped some aid in like a couple nights ago, but like that's just sadistic, honestly. Like just like dropping in some packages and making people like desperately like run to those packages. It's just.
It's sick.
It's just sickening. And so you're getting people, even Barry Weiss published an article on her outlet saying that there's a real risk of famine now. And of course, a lot of these Zionists who are now like finally admitting that shit's bad are of course saying, well, you know, it's Hamas's fault and all, you know, and of course, you know, the people who were crying genocide for so long, it's their fault because they were doing the boy who cried wolf. But now there really is a problem, and then Yahoo does need to like let some aid in now because there really is a problem now. So, you know, maybe some memo went out and told, you know, and people realize that maybe Hasbara needs to do a little bit of public.
Well, Hasbara is ineffective now. I think everybody sees.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but it seems like they're trying to save face publicly while still doing the genocide. And
what's the end game here? I mean, they attacked Iran. That's the other thing. They attacked Iran, and I guess there's a pause or a ceasefire now, not a formal declaration that you know, like that they're not going to attack or anything. So, what's going to happen with that?
Yeah, no, I read that Trump has basically given up on, you know, nuclear arms negotiations with Iran. So I think that war is. I have a feeling that's going to start up again. You know, so. We'll see what happens there, but it seems like with Gaza, what happens is that Netanyahu is kind of like pushing it to the limits of what people can tolerate and bring it to the brink, and then maybe kind of like standing off a little bit and then going even further again, stepping back a little bit and then going even further again, kind of like getting the public more and more used to it in a way. So it's very evil, obviously. It's very devious and sickening. But in a way, what I think he's doing is they're kind of like warming the public up to the final solution.
Right.
And they kind of went a little too far recently. So now they're stepping back a little bit, maybe. I don't know. Or at least they're pretending to do some humanitarian assistance, but from what I can tell, it's not really doing much of a.
So the idea is that, like, sort of like the lobster who's cooking in the pot, you gradually turn the heat up and eventually cook the lobster without them.
Right. Yeah. So we'll see what happens. I mean, there still is some level of supplies in Gaza, but you know, prices are extremely high. So I mean, people are struggling to survive. You know, there is a fundraiser that I've been supporting that I want to boost here. The Hussein team. They have a Twitter page. that you can follow now. But like I said, prices, there still is some supplies that are getting in, and these guys, they kind of pool up resources and buy stuff and distribute it. So they do good work. So if you want to support a solid fundraiser in Gaza, I recommend supporting these guys. But yeah, things are getting very bad in Gaza, and it seems like pretty much everyone's against what's happening to some degree. It's like even Zionists will admit that the situation is terrible. They're just like blaming Hamas or blaming the UN, for example.
Yeah, but it's working even less, because even now I see a lot of people express explicit support for Hamas.
Yeah, yeah. More and more people are just expressing like explicit support for Hamas. Like the Zionist talking points just aren't working, and so I don't know what's going to happen here. The fact that I don't know. The fact that we're not seeing any kind of international action, though, is really disappointing.
Yeah, it's very demoralizing.
Like, there's 80 million Egyptians, yet more Americans have risked prison time to do something about this.
Well, are you talking about in terms of the public and
the public? Yeah,
the public.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in Egypt, I imagine it's difficult considering the military dictatorship.
It is, but nonetheless, Americans have gone to prison taking action against Zionism. So I don't know.
And then there's then you can't really. I don't see what state what state-led kind of thing would happen when. I mean, nobody wants to cross the United States. No one wants to antagonize the United States. So it really does feel like we're stuck watching this horror show until it's over.
Yeah, I don't know. It's absolutely horrifying. And the reason I bring up Egypt is because there was a political prisoner released from France fairly recently. Hold on, and there was a clip. He was this Lebanese guy. So let me bring it up real quick. This guy.
في أكثر من 100 شهيد في غزة، كل
نفس النضال وبنفس الروح. مش خايف من عملية اغتيال؟
الناس اللي ما بتحكيش بالنضال هي ما تشوف الهياكل العظمية للأطفال بتتحرك بيكون ما بيشوفش.
مش خايف من عملية اغتيال جون؟
اغتيال لكل شعبنا ما يحصل كل يوم في أكثر من 100 شهيد في غزة كل يوم.
متوقع هيدا الشيء يصير معك ولا لا؟
كل يوم في أكثر من 100 شهيد في غزة، أكثر من نصهم ناس نسوين حاملة أطفالها، يعني أطفال ونسوين عم بيموتوا كل يوم، والعرب بكاملهم بجميع، يعني ملايين العرب. مش ما أحكي عن الأنظمة،
أنا عم بحكي عنك، أنت خايف على هذا؟
مسألتي ثانوية جدا. المسألة المركزية هو أن نطلع بالمراية ونقول في بنت اسمها جريتا تطلع شبر ونص جاي من السويد،
نعم،
عمرها 17 سنة بتوقف قبال غزة مشان تشوف كيف توصل أكل.
وفي
80 مليون في مصر
نعم
بيصلوا وبيصوموا ما بيقدروش يقربوا للخط الحدودي.
كيف رح تعيش
مش
اليوم؟
لأن مانعينهم، لأنه ما ماتش حدا منهم إنه ما
بس
يمنعوهم.
عندي سؤال، كيف رح تعيش اليوم؟ كيف رح
هذه مسائل سنوية، يعني هذه مسائل سنوية فيما بعد هذه مسائل سنوية وما بعرفش كيف.
بدك تقول كلمة أخيرة؟
بدي أسلم على هاي الناس اللي ما يفاجئوني بحماستهم وبشجاعتهم رغم كل الهزائم العربية ومواقف العروبة المخزية، مواقف الشارع العربي المخزي.
انت عم بتتابع الاحداث الناس
طبعا.
خلص.
Yeah, that's George Ibrahim Abdullah. He's a Lebanese communist guy who just got out of French prison.
Yeah, I mean,
for 40 years. Yeah, he was in prison for like 40 years in France, actually.
So he just got out of prison and now he's doing this. I mean, he's a really brave person. He's very courageous.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what he has to say about the current state of his people, I guess. But yeah, no, it's cool though to see those kind of old heads like secular Arab nationalists like coming out and speaking raw truth like that.
Yeah, I just I hope that we can all learn from his example.
Yeah. No, I really hope that I don't know. I really hope that we learn from these events that are happening right now, and that humanity can self-criticize. And that we can move forward, because things are very grim right now, and we can't let go of hope. But anyway, not to end on too dark of a note, but I think that's a good place to close for today. Joseph, how do you feel?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
Sorry, we're bummers.
Well,
but
we had a good talk today.
Yeah, well, we're dealing with a sick world, but. Tune in next week. We'll have more to talk about.
Definitely. There's always more to talk about. Amazing. Talking shit at the Power after 40 years in prison. A legend. Yeah, definitely. All right, y'all. See you next stream, and have a good rest.